Harbottle Castle, a site with a turbulent history and a medieval fortification which still stands in part to this day, has seen ruin and repair time and time again following sieges and different ownership. The castle was built in a dangerous area in uncertain times. It was built in Northumberland, England's border county, which saw conflict with the Scottish army, and had only 100 years prior been invaded by the Vikings at the monastery of Lindisfarne, only 40 miles northeast of the site. Northumberland was no doubt a troubled region on the fringes of English control, which faced numerous raids by the Scottish clans from just across the border. These uncertain times prompted the building of a number of defences across Northumberland, including defensive homesteads such as Harbottle Castle to the southwest and Mitford Castle to the south. Both castles, like Harbottle, have fallen into ruin due to years of sieges and the looting of building materials.
The castle saw occupation of over 500 years on and off. It saw many key events such as Scottish sieges. It hosted royalty. Margaret Tudor, who was King Henry VIII's sister, lived here. But now all that remains of this once great place are these ruins.
It is possible that the hill the current castle stands on saw activity in the prehistoric. It's certainly known that the nearby landscape was inhabited during this time. A standing stone such as the Duddo 5 stones, as well as cup and ring marks, an ancient rock art that can be found on nearby boulders and natural outcrops of rock. Although we know that there was prehistoric activity in the local landscape, we cannot say that these people inhabited the same site as the castle. However, we do know of nearby medieval fortifications which stand on the site of Iron Age hill forts, such as Dunstanburgh.
The earliest date we know a castle stood here was in 1157, when Henry II granted land to the local Umfraville family. However, the land was only granted to the Umfravilles on the condition that they build a strong fortification here. This was to defend against the Scottish, who were looking to raid further south.
The Umfravilles did indeed build a castle, a type known as a motte and bailey. This comprised of a wooden keep on a mound, this being the motte, accompanied by a larger enclosure, usually semicircular, this being the bailey, surrounded by a wooden wall and ditch. This was originally built in earth and wood, as most others were during this period, and became the main residence of the Umfraville family.
Harbottle Castle is built on a massive ridge basically, and you can see it stretching off into the distance. I'm standing on the motte at the moment. This would have been built basically on the highest, most prominent part of the landscape, where the medieval architects have basically built up a massive mound of earth on top of an already prominent area, and this would have made it really defensible. What you can see at the moment is the stone remnants of the keep that would have sit on top of this big mound. Originally it would have been wooden, and the whole site would have been wooden originally. Now what you can see down here is the curtain wall and the bailey. Unfortunately not much of it remains, and the gatehouse actually down there. Not much of it remains unfortunately, because if I take you over here to the village, they've probably used lots of the building materials for their houses have probably come from this medieval site. When people think about castles, they mainly think about stonework and the buildings that go with them. But we've also got to think about earthworks and in this case a moat, quite a big moat in fact. And basically they've scooped up all the soil and banked it up against the ramparts here. You can also see how they've banked up the earth for the moss as well in the background.
I have mentioned the strategic importance of the castle for English power in the area, but it's also important to discuss the local landscape and why King Edward II wanted to build a castle here.
One of the key reasons Harbottle Castle was built here is that overlooks Clennell Street, which was a hugely important trading route in the medieval period that runs through the Cheviot Hills. Control of trade routes such as this was hugely important for securing trade in the region, as well as making sure that no invading armies were coming through the Cheviot Hills.
In the Anglo-Saxon times, Clennell Street was known as Ermspeth, which translates as Eagle's Path, but it was certainly a routeway before this and continued to be used as a cattle droveway into the post-medieval period. Monitoring this important route through the Cheviots is certainly a key reason for the positioning of Harbottle Castle, keeping an eye on it as a trade route as well as a possible access for invading Scottish forces.
We can't see Harbottle Castle as a standalone fortress. In the 12th and 13th centuries, castles were dotted along the border region. Castles such as Norham, Chillingham and Wark. We can't think of it as a sort of castle black where it's just isolated in the region, just standalone. It's part of a series of fortifications in the landscape that was to defend against Scottish incursion.
In 1173, William the Lion of Scotland captured Harbottle Castle. However, William was captured at the Second Battle of Alnwick in 1174, ending his campaign, and the castle was subsequently returned to English ownership. The castle's defences were improved after this, including the construction of a stone keep and a stone curtain wall.
The castle was attacked again in the First War of Scottish Independence in 1296. An army operating on behalf of John Balliol, the Scottish king at the time, attacked the fortress, but it withstood the assault because of the upgraded defences.
In 1306, Robert the Bruce started raids into northern England in an attempt to force Edward II to accept Scottish independence. As part of this campaign, Harbottle was captured and damaged to prevent further use by the English forces. In 1336, Edward III, after overthrowing his father, restarted the wars with Scotland. During this time he rebuilt Harbottle to control the key border routes. However, after the capture of David II of Scotland, the need for border defences declined. Harbottle was therefore neglected and by 1351 was a ruin. In 1515, Henry VIII granted political asylum to his sister Margaret Tudor, after her husband James IV was killed at the Battle of Flodden. Margaret had lost much of her political power after James's death, and resided at Harbottle Castle during this time. By remaining at Harbottle, she was still close enough to hold some influence in Scottish politics, and in 1524 she re-entered Scotland with her son James V when he became king. The last major upgrades made at Harbottle were made around 1540. The union of the crowns in 1603 made these border fortresses redundant, however. James I later granted the castle to Lord Treasurer of Scotland in 1605, but he had very little use for it and stripped it of building materials to support other projects. After this, Harbottle Castle fell into ruin and was never repaired.
Now nothing but remnants of towers and walls remain on this windswept ridge. A poem etched on this stone sums up the turbulent past of Harbottle Castle. It reads, "Who made me into a ruin like an old city? Was it the soldiers who rode out on horseback? Was it my old enemy, the Scots? Or was it those border reavers? Perhaps it was just the centuries passing." Harbottle Castle. Right. Fucking hell.
In the Al- In the Anglo-Saxon times, Canal Street was known as Ermspeth, which translates as Eagle's Path.